Ever since Nick Saban announced his retirement, the domino effect from that decision has led to huge changes in the coaching carousel and in the transfer portal. But is Notre Dame in a position to take advantage? That's coming up in today's mailbag edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Friday, January 19th, so happy Friday, and thank you for getting your Friday started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer covering college football for Fox Sports, and if you're watching the show on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, or if you're on the go and you're listening to the podcast, please take a moment to rate the show 5 stars and subscribe if you have not already. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. The everyday listeners know that Friday episodes are usually reserved for mailbags, and that's what we got in store today. We got some really good questions this week, as always, so thank you to everyone who sent theirs in. You make my life a lot easier, and I really do appreciate it. But before we get to the questions, I want to point out that I have done a bunch of recruiting stuff on the show this week in preparation for Notre Dame's Junior Day event, which actually starts later this afternoon. Marcus Freeman and the Notre Dame coaching staff are hosting 12 of the 14 committed prospects in the class of 2025, plus several top targets left on the board. They're all coming on campus this weekend in what has become one of the most important weekends of the year for Notre Dame's recruiting operation. And on Tuesday of this week, I had Locked On's recruiting insider Brian Smith on the show to go in-depth on the current commits in the class. And then I did a 2-part episode that came out on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, where I went over Notre Dame's biggest needs left on the board based on position on offense and defense. So go check those out when you're done with this one if you have not tuned into them already. But now let's get to our first question. I'm combining 2 questions into one because I think they're asking similar things. So the first one comes from @Micah7405. How good of a chance do you think Notre Dame has at landing Keon Keeley if he decides to transfer? And then the second question is from @MattFleisner9370. Matt, if I mispronounce your last name, I'm sorry. It happens to me all the time. So I'm a little bit more sympathetic if I do it to someone else. But Matt wants to know, I just saw in the Mothership's feed that Caleb Downs entered the transfer portal. How amazing would it be to see him with Xavier Watts in the defensive backfield flying around? All right, let's get this out of the way. There is absolutely zero chance Notre Dame lands Caleb Downs in the transfer portal. You can eliminate any hope of that right now. And I understand why people think that Notre Dame might be in a position to land him. They were a finalist for Downs coming out of high school. He took 4 official visits. It was Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. And I know that there are no moral victories, especially in recruiting, but for a player as good as Downs, it was kind of a sign of good things that Notre Dame was even in the running for him, because traditionally Notre Dame would not be in the running for a player of that caliber, especially when those are his final schools. So with that being said, I think it's either Georgia or Ohio State for Caleb Downs. I think the favorite right now is Georgia for a couple reasons. One, he's from there. He's from Georgia. That's his home state. And 2, the safeties coach at Alabama, who coached him during his freshman season, Travaris Robinson, has since taken the job at Georgia as the defensive backs coach in the co-DC, I believe. Kirby Smart moved quickly on that one at adding him, and there's a belief that Downs could follow him there. But Ohio State is putting on the full court press with him. I heard that they sent like half of their staff, basically the entire defensive staff, to meet with Downs last night to try to recruit him to Ohio State in the transfer portal. So I really think it's a battle between those 2 schools. Even though Notre Dame was a finalist coming out of high school, I think Downs is at the point where he's only got 2 years left no matter what. He's already one of the best college football players in the country. He's a surefire top 10 pick when he's able to enter the NFL draft. And I think for him, he's just trying to maximize his college football experience, go to a college football factory, go to a place where he can be developed by someone he knows and obviously likes in Travaris Robinson. So I think he's going to end up at Georgia. I don't even know if Notre Dame is even going to give him a phone call. Maybe they give him a phone call just to give it a shot, but there's no chance that Downs is going to Notre Dame. Keon Keeley is a different story for a couple reasons. For one, he's not even entered his name in the transfer portal yet. So maybe he will, maybe he won't. I think most people believe that he eventually will enter his name in the transfer portal, but some people think that he's going to give the spring practice or give Alabama a shot in the spring, maybe see what Kalen DeBoer and this new defensive staff there have to offer, and then maybe if he isn't really jiving with it, then he'll enter his name in the transfer portal in that cycle. Or he could enter his name in the portal tomorrow. It's still yet to be seen what he's going to do, but I do think most people think he's going to ultimately leave Alabama. He did not play at all his freshman season. He was coming off an injury. I believe it was a shoulder injury, and he's playing behind guys like Dallas Turner, Braswell, and he just didn't have any reps on Saturdays. And then you consider that with Saban's decision to retire, which is a big reason why he went to Alabama in the first place. So it would make sense that he would look elsewhere. Now, obviously, considering the fact that Keeley was at one point committed to Notre Dame, a lot of people think that, well, if it's not Alabama, Notre Dame is the next most likely destination. I would say they're certainly going to be in the running. Notre Dame is no doubt going to pursue him if he does decide to enter the transfer portal. But I think we need to take a look back at his recruitment again and see if Notre Dame is the odds-on favorite, because Keeley committed to Notre Dame way back in June of 2021, and Mike Elston was the defensive line coach at the time. He got on Keeley early. He recruited him really hard, and is a big reason why he committed to Notre Dame. Even after Mike Elston left to take the job at Michigan, Keeley still hung around and seemed solid in his pledge, and Alabama didn't even offer him until January of 2022, several months later. So Elston leaves, and I was like, okay, well, first sign of worry. Notre Dame was able to keep him around, and then he officially visited in June of 2022. Things still seem to be solid there. And then not long after that is when there started to, those rumors about him potentially going to Alabama started to surface. He was liking a bunch of tweets about Alabama, and I think he was tweeting some things about Alabama. That made its way onto message boards, and I think red flags started to go up, and you're like, hey, wait a second, he might be looking elsewhere. Ultimately, Keeley decided to decommit right before the start of the 2022 season and ultimately committed to Alabama. Now, after he decommitted from Notre Dame, he took an official visit to Ohio State. I think Larry Johnson, the defensive line coach at Ohio State, was a major factor in his recruitment there. Johnson is still the defensive line coach at Ohio State, but he's old. He's like 72. I don't know how many years left he has with Ohio State, so maybe that plays a factor into his decision. But I think that on signing day, Ohio State finished second, even though he had already been committed to Notre Dame. That doesn't mean that Notre Dame shouldn't continue to pursue him heavily if he does decide to enter the transfer portal. I just don't think that it's, oh, well, he's leaving Alabama. He's obviously going to go to Notre Dame. I just don't think that's the case, even though I see a lot of fans assuming that's going to happen, and it could, right? I'm not going to say that it definitely won't or it's impossible or anything like that. But I would be pretty surprised if Keon Keeley eventually entered the transfer portal and ended up at Notre Dame. It's a different defensive line coach. The circumstances are different. And I just think that the transfer portal recruitments are a lot different than the high school recruitments. They're very abbreviated. He's got to make a quick decision. And even though he has that knowledge about Notre Dame from his time as a high school recruit, I just don't think it's going to happen. But hey, I'd love to be wrong on this because Keeley is an incredible prospect or an incredible player now. And obviously, if Notre Dame were able to land him, that would be a huge addition to the defensive line, which is already a strength right now for the team. Okay, coming up next, let's project what Notre Dame's starting lineup is going to look like when they head to Kyle Field and play Texas A&M. And should we be worried about Mike Mickens potentially leaving Notre Dame? Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. The NFL season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, including live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, or you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find popular parlays and more. My pick this week, I've been riding with the Texans all week long. They're plus 9.5 right now on FanDuel, going up against the 1 seed Baltimore Ravens. And last week I was taking the Browns against the Texans. Not this week. Take the Texans plus 9.5. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Okay, our next question comes from Dan Lockey, who asks, if you had to project Notre Dame's starting 11 on offense in 12 personnel and starting defense in base, who would it be for the Texas A&M game? So quarterback, easy, Riley Leonard. Running back, I think Jadarian Price will actually be running back 1 next season, but he's going to split carries with Jeremiah Love. If Jeremiah Love ends up being the first back on the field, it wouldn't surprise me. But I actually think what Price did in the Sun Bowl is indicative of what he's capable of, and I think he's actually going to earn that starting running back job next season. At wide receiver, I got Jaden Thomas and Bo Collins. Considering we're in 12 personnel, that's 2 tight ends and 2 wide receivers. I could definitely see Jaden Greathouse beating out Bo Collins. But Bo is more of a boundary receiver, and then Jaden Thomas can move around, play in the slot, play off the ball, and he's great in the run game, which Notre Dame obviously likes in 12 personnel. So I think those are going to be the two starters. The first guy off the bench is going to be Jaden Greathouse, and then at the starting slot, it's going to be Greathouse or Faison. Both guys are great contributors. Chris Mitchell is definitely going to be in the mix as well. So I think that's a position where that could change between now and the start of the season. At tight end, hopefully Mitchell Evans is healthy enough after he suffered that season-ending injury at the end of the Pitt game this past season. It seems like he's been recovering really well. Maybe he'll get the start for the season opener. If not him, then it's going to be Eli Raridan or Cooper Flanagan. The offensive line is going to be tough to predict, so I'm just going to go with what we saw in the Sun Bowl, with one exception. At left tackle, I'm going to say Charles Jagasaw. At left guard, Pat Coogan. At center, Ashton Craig. At right guard, Billy Schrouth. I think Schrouth is going to be able to beat out Rocco Spindler because Spindler is also coming off an injury. I don't think he's going to be 100% in spring practice. I think Schrouth is going to have the edge, and I think he's going to seize that opportunity. It's going to be a tough comeback for Rocco Spindler, despite the fact that he started throughout much of this past season. At right tackle, I've got Emil Wagner beating out Tosh Baker. He's going to have to get bigger for that, and maybe if he does get bigger, they can move him over to left tackle and then move Jagasaw inside, and then maybe Tosh Baker starts at right tackle. That is going to be the biggest question of the offseason, really. What does Notre Dame do on its offensive line? On defense, I think Jordan Botelho is going to start at Viper just like he has been. Howard Cross and Riley Mills are going to be on the interior, and then R.J. Oben, the Duke transfer, is going to replace Javonte Jean-Baptiste at the strong side end position. Linebacker's a little interesting, right? Because you've got Jack Kaiser, who's traditionally been a rover for Notre Dame, but now after Notre Dame lost J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofau, it opens up some more opportunities, particularly on the inside. So I think Jack Kaiser is going to move to Will, which is where Maris Leofau played. And I think Drake Bowen is actually going to be the starting Mike linebacker in his sophomore season. It's a tall task. It's a lot to ask of a guy who's only been around the program for one full season to be able to call out the defense, but I think the coaching staff thinks that highly of Drake Bowen. And also, don't be surprised if by midseason, Kingston Viliamu-Asa starts getting some starts as a true freshman. At Rover, since we are in base, I'm going to include Rover, even though Notre Dame traditionally, or at least not traditionally, lately has been running a lot more nickel. Maybe nickel is the base defense, but let's say they're in the 4-3 at Rover. I think that's going to be Jalen Sneed. If we were to do this exercise with base being nickel, then the Rover would not be on the field, and we would talk about the nickel position, which I think is going to be Christian Gray. At corner, I would have Benjamin Morrison, Jane Mickey in that instance, or there's a chance that Gray could beat out Mickey, and then maybe it's Morrison and Gray at the true cornerback positions, and then Jordan Clark, the transfer from Arizona State, steps in, and he plays nickel because I think he's more suited to play that than Jaden Mickey. At safety, easy. Xavier Watts and Rod Hurd, the transfer from Northwestern. I think, that's obvious. Even though Rod Hurd played a lot more cornerback at Northwestern, and he also played at the nickel, I think Notre Dame wants him to play at safety because they have a spot to fill there, and I think Hurd is going to do an exceptional job filling in for DJ Brown. All right, next up, Joe Bro 524 asks, reports say Cincinnati is looking at Mike Mickens to be their next defensive coordinator. What does Notre Dame need to do to keep him on staff? So it's true. Cincinnati lost their defensive coordinator, Brian Brown. He left to take the job at Ole Miss. And Justin Williams from The Athletic mentioned that Mike Mickens is a potential candidate for Cincinnati's defensive coordinator open job. This makes sense. Mike Mickens was all Big East when he played for Cincinnati. Then he coached at Cincinnati, then was hired by Brian Kelly to come over to Notre Dame. So he obviously has a history with the school. If he were promoted to D.C. at Cincinnati, that would be an upgrade over his current title at Notre Dame, which is cornerbacks coach and defensive pass game coordinator. This past offseason, Notre Dame added the pass game coordinator part to his title, and I think really that has just more to do with the pay raise. When he was just the cornerbacks coach, he was getting pursued by other college teams, even other pro teams, I think, as well. So he was in high demand, and for good reason. He's an exceptional cornerbacks coach at the college game, and I think he would do a great job in the NFL as well. So I'm not surprised to see other schools considering him for the defensive coordinator job. Marcus Freeman even said that Mike Mickens is ready to be a defensive coordinator. But to answer the question, what does Notre Dame need to do to keep him on staff? A raise would help. I think that maybe they could make him co-defensive coordinator with Al Golden. Again, I don't know how much his responsibilities would change, but I think that would lead to a pay raise. And I think that they could make the promise to Mike Mickens, hey, stick around, be the co-DC, learn how to do the job under Al Golden, and then eventually when Al Golden leaves, most likely for an NFL job, you will be our guy, you will be our in-house hire and become the next defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. It's a risk because sometimes guys don't want to wait around, and whenever it comes to a guy leaving for his alma mater, you always have to be open to that because people love the place that they went to school more often than not, especially a guy like Mike Mickens who played there and coached there. So if Mike Mickens were to leave and say, hey, I just want to go home, I want to be at the place where I played and I coach already and I want to be the defensive coordinator, I'm ready for that at this point in my career. If that's what he wants to do, it's going to be really hard for Notre Dame to keep him because even though it's nice to be co-DC and all that, it's just different than being the actual defensive coordinator, the guy that's calling the plays. And the best way to gain experience is by doing it. And as long as Al Golden is at Notre Dame, he's going to be the one calling the plays, even if he does try to mentor Mike Mickens and prepare him the best he can to eventually take that job. It's going to be tough. Right now, I haven't seen anything more than just his name being thrown out there in reports, but obviously Notre Dame needs to keep him for next season because he is just that good and he's that important to the staff. All right, coming up next, we got some really fun hypotheticals about Notre Dame, so stay tuned. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With great deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all of the fun you're going to have. I recently used Gametime to go to a concert. It wasn't even in my plans initially, but then I looked at the prices on Gametime and I was like, you know what? That's pretty cheap. I'm in. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason, and you get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Plus, you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, just 2 taps and you're set, and the tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through your email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, you know I love wrapping up the mailbag episodes with the fun questions, and we got some good hypotheticals this week, so thank you for these. Let's start with the first one from Ricardo Caliente. You can have one player from the 2024 transfer portal, one active Notre Dame alum in the NFL, and another alum who never really played in the NFL, let's say less than 10 games played. You get to add them to the 2024 team. Who you got? I'll take, this is Ricardo speaking, Isaiah Bond, Julian Love, and the late Louis Nix, rest in peace. Very good picks. Thought about this? Out of the transfer portal, I'm taking Caleb Downs. And this is also, I think he meant like anyone who entered their name in the transfer portal and already picked a destination. So Isaiah Bond is a great pick. Notre Dame obviously could use help at wide receiver. I'm taking Caleb Downs, even though he doesn't play a position of need at Notre Dame, because I don't think he's just the best player in the portal. I think he's arguably the best defensive back in the entire country already, which is kind of crazy because he's only going to be a true sophomore next season, but I think he's that good. You add Caleb Downs to Notre Dame's defense next year, they're not giving up a point. Okay, maybe that's a stretch, but still, you get my point. You add Downs to that, and they would just be unbelievable, man. Imagine Xavier Watson Downs. Like, I got the question earlier. I know I said there's a 0 chance of it happening, but hey, it's hypothetical. I'm taking Downs. All right, for my active NFL player, I know this is boring, and I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm going to take Zach Martin, the guard for the Cowboys. He's a Hall of Famer, and I'm trying to fill a need now because I already added Caleb Downs, which I didn't add to a position of need. Offensive line, like I said earlier, biggest question mark on the entire team. He's a left tackle at Notre Dame. That solves that problem by adding one of the best linemen to ever do it. You add Zach Martin, all of a sudden Notre Dame's offensive line, it's not a problem. It's a strength. Non-NFL was tough. I thought about this a lot, and I think Notre Dame really needs receiver help, even though I could have taken Isaiah Bond. So I'm going to take Rhema McKnight. Okay, the wide receiver who played for Notre Dame in the early 2000s. He started under Tyrone Willingham, and then he really had his big season for Notre Dame in 2006 when he had 15 touchdowns that year. For his career, he had 170 receptions, 2,277 receiving yards, and 22 touchdowns, and he just didn't really make it in the NFL for some reason. I think he would be wide receiver number 1 on Notre Dame next season. Now, I could have cheated, and I was going to pick Maurice Stovall because I didn't think he really had that much of a career in the NFL, and he honestly didn't. but he did appear in 81 games, mostly on special teams, but he only started 12. So maybe if I could have found a loophole, I would have taken peak Maurice Stovall and added him. Or if I really wanted to cheat, you know what? I'm taking Jeff Samardzija. I actually forgot about him as I was doing this prep. I'm taking Jeff Samardzija. That is such an easy pick. Scrap Raymond McKnight. I'm taking Jeff Samardzija. So I'm taking Caleb Downs, Zach Martin, and Jeff Samardzija. It'd be a damn good team. All right, next hypothetical. At CS Janice, if you could drop one Notre Dame team from this college football playoff era into one playoff of your choosing, which has the best chance of winning a title? I would take the 2020 team and put them in this most recent college football playoff because I think Michigan is one of the worst teams to win a championship in the era. Now, that's not to say that they didn't deserve it. They were definitely the best team in college football this season, and they proved that. But I think that the 2020 Notre Dame team would match up really well against Michigan. They're pretty similar. Like, both teams have a veteran dual-threat quarterback. They have a great running back, an elite offensive line. I mean, man, that Notre Dame running game in 2020 was just something special with Kyron Williams and Liam Eichenberg and Aaron Banks and Kramer and Haynes, all those guys. They just had an awesome offensive line. On defense, Notre Dame had real NFL dudes like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who, despite the Browns' loss to the Texans, he played out of his mind in that game. He is so good for the Browns, and he's going to get paid. Kyle Hamilton, all-pro. That's obvious. And then also, don't sleep on Nick McLeod and Kurt Hinish, two guys who you might not have guessed would have had solid NFL careers, but that's exactly the case. I think both of them went undrafted, and they're both key contributors in the NFL. That Notre Dame team only gave up 19.7 points per game, so I think they would have matched up well, and I think that Notre Dame could have beaten the Michigan team that just won the national championship. Unfortunately, that team just ran into a buzzsaw in that 2020 Alabama team, which might go down as one of the best teams ever, or at least one of the best offenses ever, because they were just that good. Okay, last question. I love this one. At Chris Fleck 1, can we move Notre Dame south of the Mason-Dixon line from January through August, then relocate back to South Bend from September through December? It is miserable here 8 months out of the year. So that sounds like a guy who is going through it, man. And I feel you, Chris. I have been there many times. The winter in South Bend is not a fun time. As a matter of fact, it is pretty miserable, like you pointed out. Although miserable 8 months out of the year seems like a stretch. I would say that it starts getting bad in November. We used to joke that the sun would go away in late October and not return to South Bend until about May, which is an exaggeration, but man, it felt true. And you just get so much snow in South Bend because of the lake effect from Lake Michigan. And I think there was one night when I was I think it was a junior, maybe I was a senior. We got 15 inches of snow overnight. Like, are you serious with that? That's insane. It's honestly a big reason why I live in California now, because experiencing South Bend winters, and then when I moved to Connecticut after college and they get really bad winters too, I was like, enough of this, man. I'm moving west where it's warm all the time, and it's true. It's really nice out here. But it might be a little hard to pull off this move to just pick up Notre Dame and move it south of the Mason-Dixon line. But it did remind me of one of my favorite stories when it comes to Notre Dame. When you're a freshman, you have to take a Moreau class, and you kind of learn about the history of Notre Dame and how the priests from France came together, how the school was founded, Father Soren. You kind of learn all the backstory, right? And part of that was reading letters sent by the priests who were sent to America to basically find California and build a prestigious Catholic university on American soil. Now, at the time, in the 1840s, this is like the peak California gold rush. So the idea was to build Notre Dame in California. You can look all of this up. It's all available in these letters and all that. So the priests land on the East Coast, not knowing just how far it is to get from the East Coast off the Atlantic Ocean all the way to California. So they start their travel, and honestly, good on those guys. They made it pretty far. They made it to South Bend. The problem was the conditions were awful. A bunch of the priests were getting sick, and then eventually they got snowed in one day, and they were like, you know what? Screw it. We're doing it here. There's a couple of lakes. Now, obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but you get my point. They're like, we're doing it here. We're not making it to California. We're building the school here. And actually, at the time, I don't know if they knew that there were two lakes, but they knew that there was one, and they were like, look, this spot seems as good as any. We are going to build the university right here. And that eventually became the University of Notre Dame that we know and love. It is so funny to me that they were like, you know what? We've had enough of this. California can wait. We don't know how far it is, but it's too far for us right now because of what they were dealing with. And they dealt with a lot, man. Those guys, it's an incredible story, and I would encourage you to look it up. But I just think it's so funny that in a way, in an alternate universe, Notre Dame could basically be Stanford, or at least be where Stanford is located. And I'll tell you what, man, like it probably would have been a lot more enjoyable when I was there. But hey, that's just part of the experience, man. And I'm grateful for it. That is it for this episode. And that is another week of Locked On Irish in the books. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. I'll be back early next week to recap everything that goes down during Notre Dame's Junior Day event. Right now, the plan is to have a recruiting insider back on the show next week to go in depth on what went down in South Bend and if there are any new commitments, which I expect there will be. And then we'll break it all down here on the show. Remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the pod. And follow the show on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. And my personal X account is at Tyler, WOJCIAK. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week.